Yet, his memory couldn't be entirely eradicated from the minds of a superstitious people. Many of his forms and underlings continued to haunt the Egyptian psyche. Each day, the new god, Ra, sailed across the sky in his solar canoes of morning and evening, and the entire journey was fraught with danger, for Apep, a giant serpent, lurked in the shadows of the otherwise clear blue sailing. Then you had Wadjet, a serpentess, who adorned the headdress of Pharaoh, and the cattle-tail accoutrement that was attached to his waist, former fashion of the horned god. When it came to the dead spirit's voyage into the Tuats, things really got rough. The regions of Osiris and Isis were darn near overcrowded with demons and dead snake ogres, all of them slithering around, only hoping to fang some hapless Ka or Ba or Ku, probably still grudging their former lord Set in the twilight world above. At night in hell, it was the worst, for here came Ra on his canoe into the deep dark with the spirit boats behind him, carrying the newly deceased. It was rich pickings for the fanged and scaly crowd, who, even after thousands of years, forgot not a thing. It was all Horus and Thoth could do to keep the horny, bloodthirsty, and quarreling creeps off the royal canoe. Never mind those poor souls in the cheap skiffs following up the rear of the regatta. Lo, pity those who were clutched and dragged overboard into the pitch black of those marshy lagoons, where naught but serpent fiends did glide the murk, a-churning with splashes and screams, as they went through the Tartarian Canal Gulf of the Phlegethon night. Maybe the very worst was the distant howls and despairing shrieks which then tore asunder the mist and sulphur-laden airs of the Eretz when the demons of Hades had collected their souls of offering. Ugh! The spirit souls shivered with fear and disgust, and not some portion of relief, when the boats of the sun sailed onward with the dark foaming current, ever deeper into the abyss obscure. No, no, look backward not, you blessed passengers, for the rock-hewn roof of very Daemonia is flickering and glowing with the lights of Lethe. The Egyptian gods were each different forms of the god Neter, the supreme god of the universe. The word Neter was the Egyptian for the English word nature, the Latin natura, or the Greek word physic. The word Neter meant the same thing as our word nature, but it also conveyed the idea of God to the Egyptians, and when pluralized, as in Neteru, meant the gods. Therefore, based upon both uses of this word in their language, it becomes quite clear that the Egyptians must have always thought of the gods, or Neteru, as divine beings of the natural world around us. Here it is, then, I think, that we see the first written expression of the most important and defining idea of paganism. God was, for the Egyptians, somehow within nature. God wasn't far away and somewhere outside of the world, but instead, God created the world and moved within it. God was both within and without the world, for God created everything in existence and was superior to the creation made. Nature, our world, our universe, and cosmos moved and functioned the way it did because God made it do so in that way and not in some other way. God controlled the world around us by the use of his or her thoughts. And what are thoughts? Thoughts are words within our souls or spirits. In another way of expressing, then, God made the world and designed it to function in its certain ways by using words of thought. This is the power and attribute of God, the omnipotence. God is the uncreated spirit who creates and gives life and being through mere thought or wish of his/her volition. The power of God is limitless and omnipotent. Only the wish of God expressed in words is necessary for things to be. The Egyptians understood this infinite quality of Neter very early on in their history. It is very likely possible that we get our later philosophical ideas about God's causing the world from this source. The ideas are the same, not similar. God wished within his/her spirit for things to be by using thought expressed in words, and the cosmos came to be and functions the way it does. This is immensity of power, the sheer omnipotence of a being that could create anything as vast and infinite as creation. The Egyptian word Neter expresses this idea of God. The Egyptians were also pagans, though, and believed in a type of polytheism. Their polytheism, though, was a shade different than some other polytheistic systems. Their gods, the Neteru, were thought of as both real gods and as different aspects of the one god, Neter. The many gods were known by the priests as being so many unique views of the same one God, variations or images of the deity who was ultimately beyond a complete human understanding. This is how Horus could be thought of as the falcon god of the sun. He was the sun, as his father Ra was the sun. Ultimately, they were both the same god. Horus was merely a more palpable and tangible version of his father Ra. Horus could be thought of as closer to the human reality here in this world. A falcon could be touched and visualized. Statues of the falcon god could be fashioned. The sun itself was blinding in its brilliance when looked upon. The falcon Horus then became a more easily viewed image of Ra, one that it was possible to relate to on a more personal human level. The other gods were the same. They were so many different versions of the supreme one god, Khepera. Even the supreme deity had several names that reflected a few of his/her known attributes. Khepera was such a name for the one. Khepera meant to bring into existence or being. Why is all this important to understand for the Satanist and pagan? Because it is our own history, for one thing. Of course, it is very far removed from us in temporal distance, but not so far that we can't still appreciate it and see its worth. This is especially so because we can see how some of Egyptian thought still affects us even today, and much of what was believed then is still relevant today. Disregard the technological and historical difference, and much of what was believed then is still as relevant now as it was then. I think the most important belief we can glean from the Egyptians is their understanding of how God moves within nature. This is the foundation stone upon which all of their religious and mythological belief is based. The Egyptians represented their gods as creatures with animal heads and human bodies for a reason. The priests had the statues of the gods fashioned in this way on purpose, It was so that the people would realize that God, or Neter, moved within the world around them. Khepera was not distant from them. Khepera was all around us in the world, her spirit moving through it each day. That this was their way of viewing reality can be seen from the myth of Ra. Ra, the sun god, starts each day by voyaging across the sky in his boat. Night comes in the evening when his boat disappears below the horizon in the west. This myth may seem very simplistic and naive to us today with our advanced science and technology, but the thought and philosophy behind it is as valid now as it was then. God created the world. God created the cosmos. God created the sun. Why shouldn't we still see God as the power of the sun, providing life and energy to our world? Of course, Khepera is much more infinite than this only. Khepera moves also here, in this our world, on a daily basis, as she does everywhere in all of existence. The sun, though, is still a very potent token of this power, ever showering light and life upon us throughout eternity. Not a chance happening of love and creation to be dismissed lightly, it seems. Yes, we know now how it is that the sun does this miraculous generation of electromagnetic energy, but knowing the how scientifically doesn't explain the why religiously or philosophically. If an Egyptian priest were somehow alive today, what would he say about this question, knowing what we do now about the scientific process of fusion? I think he would say, "So there, we always thought as much. Your science is merely a wonderful way of explaining how Khepera designed the world. You have discovered some of the ways in which God thinks in words of spirit." The Egyptian would explain science for us, instead of science explaining the Egyptian. He would be amazed, I'm sure, at our scientific knowledge and wonder over our understanding of the world and the universe, but it probably wouldn't affect his belief in Khepera whatsoever, only make him more devout. This is because to the Egyptian priest, science would be a most valuable study for understanding the thoughts of God Khepera. He'd love it.